So guys, as promised, we are now in the very famous pawn shop. Rick.
Pawn shop. So this was probably 10, 12 years ago. We did some promos for PawnStars in the UK.
At 60 years old, Rick Harrison, the man the world knows as the confident, quick-thinking star of PawnStars, is living through a reality far more heartbreaking than anyone ever imagined. For years, millions watched him behind the counter of the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, turning history into profit, cracking jokes, and acting like nothing in life could throw him off balance. He always looked strong, always looked in control, always looked like the kind of man who had an answer for everything. But what viewers never saw was the emotional weight he was carrying behind the scenes, pain that grew silently, privately, and eventually forced him to face a truth no fame or fortune could fix. Because what Rick is going through now isn't another negotiation, another rare item, or another profitable deal. It's personal, it's painful, and it changed him forever. The success of PawnStars made him a household name, but it also came with a cost that hit closer to home than anyone realized. Behind the cameras, Rick faced devastating family loss, deep personal regrets, and battles that pushed him to the edge. Not just financially, but emotionally. The world saw the TV star. No one saw the man who was slowly breaking. Now, as Rick enters his 60s, the truth is finally becoming impossible to hide. The story of what really happened to him isn't just shocking, it's tragic. Because this time, Rick Harrison isn't bargaining for profit. He's fighting to hold on to what's left of his life, his family, and his legacy. And the question no one ever asked is now the one that matters most. What happens when the man who spent a lifetime valuing everything has to face what he's lost? Rick Harrison didn't grow up with fame, wealth, or the comfort people assume he always had. Long before television cameras entered his life, he was just a kid struggling to find a place in a world that didn't seem built for him. Born in Las Vegas but raised between financial instability and constant change, Rick learned early that life doesn't hand out success. People fight for it. Even as a child, he wasn't the image of confidence he later became. He suffered from epilepsy, missing school constantly because of seizures, which left him isolated and behind in his education. While other kids were learning in classrooms, Rick spent most days alone at home, reading, observing, and trying to understand how the world worked. Those long hours sparked something in him, a fascination with history, objects, and the hidden value people often ignore. By the time he was a teenager, Rick wasn't dreaming of fame. He was trying to survive. His father, Richard the Old Man Harrison, was strict, military-minded, and believed only in hard work. There were no shortcuts, no sympathy, no excuses. And as tough as it was, that very pressure would later become the foundation of everything Rick built. At just 17, he became a father himself, forced into adulthood faster than he ever imagined. With no college degree, no stable income, and a young family to support, Rick needed something that worked, and fast. That's when the pawn world entered his life. Not as a glamorous business, but as a last chance. Rick and his father started small, buying and selling whatever they could, often scraping by just enough to keep the lights on. The early pawn shop wasn't filled with rare treasure, celebrities, or cameras. It was dusty shelves, bargain hunters, desperate sellers, and endless uncertainty. But what Rick had, even then, was an instinct, an almost uncanny ability to know what had value and what didn't. He trained himself not just to look at things, but to understand the stories behind them, the history attached to them, the reasons people either treasured or abandoned them. That skill would become his trademark. But the real turning point came in 1988, when Rick finally achieved something nearly impossible, a full federal pawn license. It took years, endless paperwork, constant rejection, and enough persistence to break most people. But Rick wouldn't stop. And when the gold and silver pawn shop finally opened its doors, it wasn't luck. It was sweat, pressure, obsession, and refusal to quit. The shop became his life, long before it became entertainment for millions. Even then, Rick didn't expect anything more than a business that could sustain itself. But slowly, the shop became a landmark in Las Vegas. Locals came in not just to pawn things, but to talk, negotiate, argue, and test Rick's knowledge. Word spread. The shop earned a reputation. and eventually Hollywood noticed. But before PawnStars ever existed, Rick already carried the responsibility of keeping the shop alive, supporting his family, and living up to a father who believed in discipline above everything. Nothing about Rick's rise was overnight. It was built out of struggle, sacrifice, and pressure most people never see. And that's why what happened later, after success, after fame, after the show, hit him so much harder than anyone expects. Because when you spent your whole life fighting to build something, losing pieces of it becomes a different kind of pain. Not just financial, but personal. When PawnStars finally made its way to television in 2009, Rick Harrison's world changed overnight. What began as a modest shop on a quiet Las Vegas street suddenly became the center of one of the most watched reality shows in the world. Viewers were drawn in by the rare items, the surprising deals, and the simple, sometimes hilarious dynamic between Rick, his son Corey, his father the old man, and the unforgettable fan favorite Chum Lee. The show didn't just make money, it made history. Within months, the pawn shop that once struggled to attract customers now had lines of people wrapping around the block. Many of them not there to pawn anything at all, just to see the man from TV. For Rick, the success was overwhelming, but at first, it felt like everything he had ever worked for was finally paying off. He became a recognizable face around the world, featured in interviews, documentaries, and international tours. The pawn shop became a tourist destination. Merchandise and brand deals started pouring in. People assumed that with fame came ease, comfort, and happiness. But what viewers couldn't see through the screen was the quiet shift happening behind the scenes, pressure that grew heavier the bigger the show became. Suddenly, Rick wasn't just running a business. He was running a brand. Every decision mattered. Every mistake was public. Every disagreement became a headline. The shop that was once about survival and family turned into a machine that needed constant feeding, new episodes, new deals, new storylines. And the more successful the show became, the more it exposed something Rick never wanted to admit. The business no longer felt like his. It felt like something he had to protect, perform for, and keep alive at any cost. Fame didn't just change Rick, it changed the relationships around him. People close to him started seeing him differently. Some wanted things from him. Others expected him to solve every problem because they assumed success meant unlimited power. Even within the family, tensions began to grow. Rick was the face of the show, but not everyone liked how decisions were being made or who was getting the most attention. The world saw laughter, deals, and banter. Behind the cameras, arguments were more real than the show ever showed. The one person who seemed to understand Rick more than anyone was his father, the old man. The two didn't always agree, and they clashed like family often does. But there was a quiet bond between them, one built from years of struggle, survival, and sacrifice. As the show grew, that bond became one of the few things keeping Rick grounded. His father was the reminder of where it all started, what the pawn shop meant before the fame, and why they built it in the first place. Because as the cameras kept rolling and the money kept growing, life around Rick was slowly falling apart. The more famous he became, the more he realized that success does not erase pain. It just hides it where no one can see it. The show didn't just bring him wealth. It brought lawsuits, betrayals, family fractures, and eventually a loss so deep it would break him in a way the world never saw. People thought Rick Harrison had it all. But what he was really carrying was everything he was losing. Losing his father was the moment Rick Harrison truly began to change, because no amount of success, fame, or fortune could prepare him for what was coming. Richard Benjamin, the old man. Harrison wasn't just the co-owner of the pawn shop or a cast member on PawnStars. He was the foundation of Rick's entire life, his teacher, his strict guide, the one person who never let him drift too far from reality. The old man was tough, silent, disciplined, and never afraid to say exactly what he thought, even if it hurt. That presence was something Rick relied on, even when he didn't say it out loud. But when the old man's health began to fail, everything inside Rick started to collapse with him. The cameras kept rolling, but what viewers didn't see was how quickly things were changing behind closed doors. The old man was appearing less, working less, and slowing down in ways that didn't match the larger-than-life personality fans adored. For Rick, every day felt like a countdown he wasn't ready to face. And when the day finally came in June 2018, the day the man who shaped the pawn shop, the show, and Rick's life passed away, the emotional blow was far more devastating than the world ever realized. Fans around the world mourned the loss of the old man. But for Rick, the pain wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was about losing the last piece of the life he built before PawnStars changed everything. The shop suddenly felt different. The show felt different. Even the air inside the building felt heavier, as if aprons had been removed that could never be replaced. And while Rick tried to act strong on camera, to keep the shop running, to protect the show and its legacy, something inside him had quietly broken. But death wasn't the only thing Rick had to deal with. What came next was something no one expected: conflict, bitterness, and legal tension within the very family that once stood together on screen. The old man's will didn't just divide assets. It reopened old wounds, old jealousy, old resentment. When it became public that one family member had been written out entirely, the world saw a headline. But Rick saw the beginning of a fracture he couldn't stop. Suddenly, the family that viewers believed was united was being pulled apart. Rick was caught in the middle of grief, business pressure, and a painful reality. The more public your life becomes, the more private pain turns into public scrutiny. People around him started taking sides. Lawsuits followed. Accusations surfaced. What should have been a period of mourning turned into something darker, a fight over legacy, money, and control. And Rick, who had spent years being the calm negotiator, on television was now unable to negotiate anything that truly mattered. Losing his father didn't just leave a hole in his heart. It left him with questions about everything he thought he understood: the meaning of success, the weight of family, the price of fame. For the first time, Rick wasn't just running a business or a TV empire. He was trying to hold together pieces of a life that was unraveling faster than he could repair it. People still walked into the shop every day, smiling, asking for photos, saying they loved the show. And Rick smiled back, signed autographs, and acted like everything was fine. But inside, there was a silence that even the sound of the shop's doorbell couldn't fill. The man who once valued things based on their worth was now being forced to face something he never wanted to measure: how much a life changes when the person who held it together is gone. After his father's passing, Rick Harrison thought the worst pain was already behind him. But what followed was a new kind of heartbreak, one that didn't come from loss, but from people he never expected to turn against him. The world saw PawnStars as a family show built on trust, loyalty, and shared history. Behind the scenes, however, the family that once stood together in front of millions was quietly breaking apart, piece by piece, turning the legacy Rick spent his life building into a battleground. The first shock came when legal documents surfaced, showing that Rick's father had written one of his children out of the will entirely, a decision that instantly set off tension that spilled into public view. Instead of grieving together, the family found themselves on opposite sides of a divide, and Rick was caught in the middle. But the real damage came later, when lawsuits began. Lawsuits not from strangers or business rivals, but from blood relatives. Suddenly, the pawn shop wasn't just a business. It was evidence. It was leverage. It was the center of a fight no one watching the show ever saw coming. Rick, the man known for staying calm under pressure, was now stuck balancing lawyers, accusations, financial demands, and the painful truth that trust once broken never returns the same. Every time a new legal filing hit the news, the public reacted like it was entertainment. But for Rick, it was another reminder that fame doesn't protect you. It exposes you. Everything he did, everything he said, even everything he didn't say was now being used against him. And while fans assumed the show had made him untouchably wealthy, the reality was far different. The pawn shop was still a real business with real bills, real employees, and real stress. The show brought fame, but fame didn't stop the increasing costs, taxes, lawsuits, and financial pressure that came with running an empire. People believed Rick lived in comfort. What they didn't know was that behind the scenes, he was fighting to keep control of the very thing he created. But the emotional toll was even heavier. The cameras kept recording, the customers kept coming, but the man behind the counter wasn't the same. The jokes felt quieter, the smiles looked practiced. The confidence that once came naturally now felt like a mask he had to wear to avoid letting the world see how much he was breaking on the inside. Because the hardest part wasn't the lawsuits, the money struggles, or the headlines. The hardest part was the silence when he was finally alone. For years, Rick was surrounded by people on and off camera. Employees, fans, customers, producers, family. But grief and betrayal create a kind of loneliness that even a crowded room can't fix. The pawn shop that once felt like his greatest achievement now felt like a reminder of everything he lost. His father, his peace, and the family unity that once made it all meaningful. Even the show itself began to change. Storylines shifted. On-screen relationships felt different. Some faces disappeared. Others stayed, but not in the same way. And as the world kept watching episodes and reruns, most viewers had no idea that behind every filmed scene there was a real man, quietly, holding back the weight of a life that was slowly falling apart. The tragedy wasn't that Rick lost money. It wasn't that he faced lawsuits. It wasn't even that fame came with a price. The real tragedy was that everything Rick spent decades building, his business, his name, his family, was now the very thing he was fighting not to lose. And at 60 years old, the man who once valued everything based on history, rarity, and worth was now learning the hardest lesson of all. Some losses don't come with a price tag. They come with a scar.